The first sound was always the generators, a low, mechanical hum that vibrated through the concrete and steel of Camp Resolute, steady as a heartbeat. Even at 0200, when the base lights dimmed and the runways fell quiet, the generators never stopped. Power meant life. Silence meant vulnerability. From the outside, the base looked like any other forward operating installation. Rows of prefab buildings, floodlights, antenna arrays clawing at the sky. But inside, it carried a different weight. This was where operations were reviewed, not celebrated, not buried, reviewed. The men and women who passed through Camp Resolute often said the same thing. You didn't come here to be thanked. You came here to be measured. Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance stood alone in the corridor outside Building 7, her boots aligned perfectly with the floor tiles, hands clasped behind her back. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface of a darkened window. Her cheek still ached, not visibly bruised, not swollen, just hot, like a warning under the skin. Inside the building, voices murmured, low, controlled, important, the kind of voices that never had to raise themselves to be obeyed. Mara inhaled slowly through her nose. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. She had learned that rhythm in a desert half a world away, kneeling behind a mud wall while gunfire cracked overhead. It kept the hands steady. It kept panic from bleeding into motion. Tonight, it kept her upright. The door at the end of the hall opened. A staff officer glanced at her without expression. "They're ready for you." Mara nodded once and stepped forward. The conference room was colder than the hallway. Not physically, emotionally. 5 flags stood behind the long table. Marine Corps, red, navy blue, Joint Command insignia. The American flag itself, stiff and unmoving. 5 men sat beneath them. 4 Marine generals, 1 civilian defense advisor. Each uniform was immaculate. Ribbons perfectly spaced. Medals catching the light just enough to remind you they were there. Mara stopped 3 feet from the table and snapped to attention. Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance reporting as ordered, sir. No one returned the greeting. General Thomas Harlan studied her like a problem he already disliked. He was tall, broad-shouldered, even in his late 50s. The kind of man who filled rooms without speaking. The kind who had learned early that confidence could substitute for empathy. Harlan tapped a folder with 2 fingers. Your after-action report, he said, contains discrepancies. Yes, sir. Explain. Mara didn't rush. Operation Black Ember deviated from projected parameters, she said. Enemy presence exceeded ISR estimates. A general to Harlan's left, Briggs, 2 stars, logistics background, leaned back. Your team was not tasked with extended engagement. Correct, sir. So why does your report include a confirmed kill count of 14? The word kill sat in the air like smoke. Mara felt the familiar tightening in her chest. Not guilt, not pride, memory. Because that was the number, she said. The civilian advisor adjusted his glasses. That figure is unusually high for a mission officially categorized as low contact. Mara nodded. Yes, sir. Harlan folded his hands. You initially reported 3. I initially reported under sedation, Mara replied calmly. And with incomplete data. Harlan's jaw tightened. So now you're revising history. No, sir. Then what are you doing? Telling it fully. The room shifted. The footage never captured the smell. That was always the lie of recordings. Black Ember began under moonless sky. The desert stretched flat and endless, broken only by the low compound walls ahead. Drones whispered overhead, invisible but present. The insertion bird hovered just long enough for ropes to drop. Mara hit the ground and moved. No hesitation, no wasted motion. She led the stack to the breach point, fingers signaling silently. The team flowed behind her, trained bodies moving as one organism. The explosion was clean. The first room was empty. The second wasn't. Gunfire erupted from a hidden doorway. One of her men went down hard, screaming as shrapnel tore into his thigh. Mara returned fire without thought. 1. 2. The hallway narrowed. Darkness swallowed everything beyond her weapon light. The drone strike had missed a tunnel. They poured out of it like shadows with rifles. Mara advanced. She didn't remember pulling the trigger 14 times. She remembered stepping over bodies to reach her wounded teammate. She remembered dragging him backward while firing blind around corners. She remembered the sound a man makes when he realizes he's been hit. She remembered the hallway finally going quiet. 14 bodies. 3 survivors. Extraction under fire. Mission time. 11 minutes longer than planned. Everything about it wrong. Everything about it real. Back in the conference room, Harlan rose slowly from his chair. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, voice low, "you are accusing this command of falsifying records." "No, sir." "Then what are you accusing us of?" Mara met his eyes, of preferring a cleaner version of events. The slap came without warning, a sharp crack, skin on skin. Her head snapped sideways. For a fraction of a second, the room held its breath. She tasted blood. She did not move her feet. She did not speak. Harlan leaned in. "You lying bitch," he said under his breath. "You think you can walk in here and rewrite an operation because you feel guilty?" Mara slowly turned her head back. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "Sir," she said, "if I were lying, I'd give you a smaller number." Harlan stiffened. 14 isn't impressive, she continued. "It's not heroic. It's not good for recruitment videos." She paused. "It's just true." Silence. Then the sentence that broke the room, "Do you want a clean record or an honest one?" Mara had never wanted to be seen. As a child, she learned early that attention brought questions, and questions brought consequences. Her father came home broken more nights than whole. Her mother learned to read his silence like weather. When Mara joined the Navy, she did it quietly. No big speeches, no family ceremony. Special warfare training stripped her down to instinct and rebuilt her piece by piece. She learned discipline through exhaustion, courage through repetition. She learned that leadership wasn't shouting, it was standing where others hesitated. She learned to carry weight without advertising it. That was who stood in that room. Not a liar, not a rebel, a professional. The door opened, a Master Chief entered, eyes tight. "Sir," he said, "JAG is on the line." Harlan turned, and the Senate Armed Services Committee just requested the full body cam footage. The civilian advisor went pale. Harlan's hand dropped slowly to his side. The truth had already moved beyond the room. Mara hadn't threatened, she hadn't raised her voice, she had simply refused to bend. No announcement followed the meeting, no official reprimand, no apology, no explanation. At Camp Resolute, silence was never neutral. It was procedural. Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance was instructed to remain on base pending administrative clarification. Her access badge still opened doors, but slower. Her name still appeared on duty rosters, but without assignments. She was not grounded. She was paused. The first night after the hearing, she returned to her quarters just after midnight. The hallway lights flickered, cycling to night power. Somewhere outside, boots echoed. Another unit rotating in. Another mission beginning without her. She sat on the edge of her bunk and finally allowed herself to touch her cheek. It had swollen slightly, not enough to draw attention, enough to remember. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. It never did after rooms like that. By morning, rumors moved faster than official channels ever could. A supply officer avoided eye contact. A junior lieutenant hesitated before saluting, then overcorrected. A Marine captain she'd trained with nodded once, tight and respectful, then said nothing. She felt it, the recalibration. In military culture, everyone understands the unspoken math, truth minus rank equals danger. By noon, she was summoned again, not to Building 7, but to a smaller office near Personnel Command. Captain Elliot Warren, Navy Legal Liaison, waited inside. Mid-40s, graying hair, eyes that had seen careers end and lives unravel without theatrics. He gestured to a chair. "Sit, Mara." He didn't use her rank. That mattered. He slid a folder across the desk. Thinner than before. Too thin. "This isn't a court-martial," he said. "Not yet." She nodded. "But it's not nothing." She waited. "You're being reassigned," Warren continued. "Effective immediately." "To where, sir?" Warren exhaled slowly. "Joint Training Oversight. Stateside. No operational command." Mara absorbed that. Training oversight was where operators went when command didn't know what to do with them. Not punishment, not promotion, containment. "Am I being charged?" she asked. "No." "Am I being censured?" "No." "Then why am I being moved?" Warren met her eyes. Because you embarrassed people who don't like being embarrassed. 3 days later, the footage leaked. Not to the public. Not yet. First, to the Senate Armed Services Committee, then to Inspector General, then to offices with no windows and no names on the doors. Mara wasn't present when they watched it. She didn't need to be. She had lived it. The video was grainy. Body cam footage always was. Shaking angles. Muzzle flashes bleaching the frame white. But the audio was clear. Commands shouted, breathing, pain, and then the hallway. 14 engagements, 14 confirmations. No hesitation, no excess, no violation of ROE, just efficiency under collapse, the kind of footage that unsettled people who had never been there. General Harlan watched the footage alone. He didn't blink, he didn't flinch, but when it ended, he sat in silence longer than necessary. He had built a career on managing perception, on shaping chaos into narratives that could survive press conferences and appropriations hearings. Mara Vance had not broken rules. She had broken convenience. His aide entered quietly. "Sir, the IG wants a statement." Harlan nodded once. "Tell them I'll provide it." When the aide left, Harlan stared at the paused image on the screen, a still frame of Mara advancing down the hallway, weapon raised, posture perfect, teammate bleeding behind her. She didn't look heroic. She looked inevitable. 2 weeks later, Mara boarded a transport plane alone. No send-off, no ceremony. Just orders and a seat by the window. As the aircraft lifted, Camp Resolute shrank beneath her. Floodlights, runways, secrets. She didn't feel relief. She felt distance. Joint Training Oversight sat outside Norfolk, tucked behind layers of bureaucracy and pine trees. Clean offices, PowerPoint walls, people who talked about war in terms of metrics. Her new office was small, a desk, a computer, a whiteboard no one used. Her job, review training protocols for ethical compliance. It was almost funny. Almost. 3 weeks into reassignment, a knock came at her door. An ensign stood there, early 20s, nervous, fresh uniform. "Ma'am?" he asked. "Lieutenant Commander Vance?" "Yes." I was told you might be willing to talk." She gestured him in. He stood until she nodded toward the chair. "Ma'am," he said, words tumbling out. "I heard what happened. At Resolute." She didn't correct him. "They're telling us," he continued, "that reporting details can be contextual." Mara folded her hands. And I don't want to get it wrong," he said. "I don't want to lie, but I also don't want to end my career before it starts." She studied him. He wasn't looking for rebellion. He was looking for permission to be honest. Mara spoke carefully. "Courage," she said, "doesn't always look like confrontation." He listened. "Sometimes it looks like precision. Accuracy. Refusing to exaggerate or erase." She paused. "You don't need to volunteer for martyrdom, but when asked directly, answer cleanly." He swallowed. "And if that costs me," Mara met his eyes, "then you'll know what you're made of." He nodded slowly. When he left, she sat alone for a long time. 6 months later, the findings were released. Not publicly, internally. Language was careful. Careers were adjusted quietly. General Harlan announced his retirement for personal reasons. Another general accepted reassignment. The civilian advisor resigned. No press conference mentioned Mara Vance, but her report remained unchanged. 14. No edits. No redactions. The call came late one evening. "Unknown number," she answered. "This is Vance." A pause. Then a familiar voice. "Lieutenant Commander." She straightened. "Sir, it was Captain Warren. They're closing the file," he said. "No charges." "Understood. There's also a notation." She waited. "Your conduct was deemed professionally exemplary under pressure." Mara closed her eyes. And, Warren added, "you're cleared for operational command again, if you want it." She didn't answer immediately. Outside her window, recruits jogged past in formation, cadence echoing. Finally, she spoke. "I'll think about it." That night, Mara went for a run. The air was cool, the road quiet. She ran not to escape, but to remember who she was before rooms like that tried to define her. She didn't regret the number. She didn't regret the truth, because somewhere a young officer would tell an accurate story instead of a convenient one, and that mattered. Mara declined operational command. Not immediately, not dramatically. She declined it the way seasoned professionals decline things they understand too well, quietly, with reasons that could not be argued against, without revealing motives no one wanted exposed. She cited recovery time, administrative backlog, ongoing commitments. The truth was simpler. She needed distance before stepping back into rooms where silence could kill just as surely as bullets. Joint training oversight didn't feel like exile anymore. It felt like a vantage point. From there, she saw patterns. How language softened before reports climbed ladders. How numbers rounded themselves into comfort. How uncomfortable facts were contextualized until they barely resembled reality. She didn't interfere. She corrected. Small things at first. A phrasing here, a clarification there, a note in the margin that simply said, "Source verification incomplete." At first, people resisted. Then they adapted. Because Mara didn't accuse, she documented. And documentation had a way of outliving rank. Colonel Evan Rourke noticed her 6 months in. He was Army, older, scarred, permanently unimpressed by theatrics. A man who had buried too many soldiers to tolerate polished lies. He called her into his office without ceremony. "You're the one from Resolute," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "Yes, sir." He finally raised his eyes. "They say you're difficult." Mara didn't react. "They also say," he continued, "you don't miss details." She waited. Rourke leaned back. "I'm forming a red team review cell," he said. "Independent oversight, no PR mandate." A pause. "I want you on it," Mara considered. Red team work was invisible, unrewarded, necessary. "What's the scope?" she asked. Rourke smiled faintly. "Truth before it gets dressed," she nodded. "I'm in." The next operation wasn't Black Ember. It was smaller, cleaner, stateside adjacent but overseas adjacent enough to matter. A joint task force raid gone sideways. Not catastrophic, but questionable. Civilian presence underestimated. Command decisions rushed. After-action report already drifting toward convenience. The red team cell reviewed raw footage. Mara sat through it in silence. She paused the video once. "Back it up 3 seconds," she said. They did. There, on the edge of frame, a figure moved where no one had marked one. A civilian. Alive. The room shifted. Someone cleared their throat. "That wasn't included in the ISR summary," an analyst said. Mara nodded. "It is now." The pushback came swiftly. Emails flagged for clarification. Meetings postponed. Phone calls that started polite and ended tense. A brigadier general requested a private discussion. Mara entered the office alone. He didn't slap her. He smiled. "You're building a reputation," he said lightly. "I'm doing my job, sir." "Your job," he replied, "does not include undermining operational confidence." She met his gaze. "My job includes accuracy." He leaned forward. "You understand how this works. The public doesn't need every jagged edge," Mara answered without heat. "The public doesn't deploy. We do." Silence stretched. Finally, the general waved a hand. "You're dismissed." Outside, Mara exhaled slowly. Same battlefield, different weapons. That night, alone in her apartment, Mara replayed old memories she usually kept sealed. The hallway, the bodies, the sound of her teammate breathing again once they cleared the LZ. 14 wasn't just a number. It was 14 decisions made in seconds so others could live. She wondered how many stories like hers had been sanded smooth over the years, how many operators carried truths they were never asked to tell, how many leaders mistook control for strength. She slept poorly. She always did after thinking too long. The email arrived at $300 encrypted. Internal routing only. From unknown. Subject, "Thank you." She hesitated, then opened it. "Ma'am, you don't know me. I was on a team overseas last year. Our report was edited. I watched what happened to you. Because of that, I didn't sign off on a lie last week. It cost me a slot. But my team slept that night. Thank you for standing still when it mattered." Mara read it twice. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the dark. For the first time since Resolute, her chest loosened. Not pride. Purpose. Change didn't announce itself. It never did. But slowly, language tightened. Reports grew more precise. Officers asked harder questions earlier, not because they feared punishment, but because someone had modeled what accuracy looked like under pressure. Mara wasn't famous, she wasn't celebrated, but she was referenced. Quietly. "Run it past Vance, check the numbers again, make sure this holds up." Truth, once defended, learned how to stand on its own. One afternoon, Mara stood on the observation deck overlooking a training field. Recruits moved below. Imperfect, loud, learning. Captain Warren joined her, hands in pockets. "You changed the weather," he said. She glanced at him. "I didn't mean to." He nodded. "No one ever does." They stood in silence. "You ever regret it?" he asked finally. Mara thought of the slap. The hallway, the email at 0300, "No," she said. "I regret how rare it was." That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Mara walked the perimeter road alone. She no longer felt like she was waiting. She felt like she was holding a line others didn't yet see, but would one day rely on. The invitation didn't come through normal channels. No calendar block, no formal summons. It arrived as a sealed envelope on Mara Vance's desk, unmarked except for a single line typed in block letters. No rank, no explanation. She read it once, then again. Inside was a date, a time, and a location, Pentagon. Sublevel C, secure annex. She felt the familiar tightening, not fear, but recognition. Rooms like that only opened when silence had failed. The drive into Washington was gray and wet. Rain streaked the windshield as the city blurred past. Monuments loomed half-hidden by mist, stone reminders of ideals heavier than the people who carried them. Mara parked where directed, passed through 3 security checkpoints, surrendered her phone, her watch, her access badge. A young Air Force lieutenant escorted her through corridors that narrowed the deeper they went. No windows, no insignia. Only doors with numbers. At the final door, he stopped. "They'll call you in," he said. Then he left her alone. The bench outside the chamber was metal, cold. Mara sat straight-backed, hands resting on her knees. She wasn't rehearsing answers. She had learned long ago that rehearsed truths sounded like lies. From inside the room came muffled voices, measured, deliberate. She wondered who else had been summoned. She wondered who had resisted. After 12 minutes, the door opened. A woman in civilian clothes, mid-50s, sharp eyes, gestured to her. "Lieutenant Commander Vance," she said. "Please." The room was smaller than she expected. Oval table, 7 seats filled. A mix of uniforms and suits, Army, Navy, Air Force, civilian oversight. No flags, no pageantry. This wasn't about symbolism. This was about consequence. Mara stopped 2 steps inside the door. "Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance reporting as ordered." "Thank you," the chairwoman said. "Please sit." Mara did. The chairwoman folded her hands. "You're here because your name appears repeatedly in internal correspondence related to reporting integrity." Mara nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." "You were present during Operation Black Ember." "Yes, ma'am." "You submitted an after-action report that contradicted preliminary command summaries." "Yes, ma'am." "You maintained that position despite personal consequence." "Yes, ma'am." The chairwoman studied her. "Why?" The question was simple. The room waited. Mara answered without flourish. "Because the report belonged to the operation," she said. "Not to me. Not to them." Silence followed. A man in a Marine Corps uniform leaned forward. "You understand," he said, "that operational truth can destabilize strategic narratives." "Yes, sir." "And that destabilization can cost funding, alliances, public trust." "Yes, sir." "Then why insist on a number you knew would cause friction?" Mara met his gaze. "Because friction already existed," she said. "The number didn't create it. It revealed it." The man frowned. "You're suggesting discomfort justifies disruption." "No, sir," she replied. "I'm suggesting reality doesn't require permission." A civilian member scribbled something down. Another panelist spoke. Air Force, silver hair, quiet voice. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "do you believe senior leadership deliberately falsified information?" Mara chose her words carefully. "I believe," she said, "that pressure influences language, and language, when left unchecked, drifts." The man nodded slowly. "And what stops that drift?" Mara didn't hesitate. "People willing to be specific when it's inconvenient." The chairwoman leaned back. "You're aware," she said, "that this panel can recommend policy changes." "Yes, ma'am." "And disciplinary actions." "Yes, ma'am." "And that your testimony could permanently alter your career trajectory." "Yes, ma'am." "Why speak so plainly then?" Mara took a breath. "Because this room only exists," she said, "because plain speech was missing." The lights dimmed. The footage played. Again. But this time, the room didn't look away. They watched the hallway, the movement, the decisions. When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Finally, the Marine panelist exhaled. "That corridor," he said quietly, "was never briefed." Mara nodded. "No, sir, and 14 is accurate." "Yes, sir." He sat back. "Then the report stands." The chairwoman nodded once. "Agreed." The questions changed after that. Less adversarial, more structural. How often does this happen? What incentives distort reporting? How do we protect truth-tellers without encouraging recklessness? Mara answered what she could. "I don't think people lie because they're evil," she said at one point. "I think they lie because they're afraid." "And what reduces that fear?" the chairwoman asked. "Consistency," Mara replied. "If the truth costs everyone equally, it stops being singled out." The panel absorbed that. At the end, the chairwoman folded her notes. "Lieutenant Commander Vance," she said, "we are considering the formation of a permanent integrity review office." Mara remained still. "We need leadership for it," the woman continued. "Operational credibility, moral authority." She paused. "We'd like you to consider heading it." The room was silent. Mara felt the weight of the offer, not ambition, but implication. Visibility, responsibility, a target. She answered honestly. "I'll serve," she said, "if the office answers upward, and sideways, not downward." A faint smile touched the chairwoman's mouth. "That was our intent." When Mara left the chamber, the hallway felt less narrow. The escort didn't speak. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city smelled clean. She stood on the steps for a moment, letting the air fill her lungs. She didn't feel victorious. She felt aligned. That night, alone in her hotel room, Mara wrote a single line in her notebook. "Truth isn't loud. It's patient." She closed the book. Tomorrow the work would begin. The office didn't look important. That was intentional. No flags, no portraits, no long corridors designed to intimidate. The Integrity Review Office occupied a converted administrative wing with glass walls and neutral colors. Transparency, both literal and implied. Anyone could see inside. Anyone could walk past and know it existed. Mara Vance stood in the doorway on the first morning and took it in. 4 desks, a secure server terminal, a conference table scarred with use from a previous life. No applause followed her appointment. No announcement beyond a quiet internal memo. Those who needed to know already did. Those who didn't would soon feel it. Integrity was not dramatic work. It didn't come with explosions or hero shots. It came with reading, endless reading, reports, transcripts, footage, metadata, marginal notes written by exhausted officers at 0300 trying to reconcile what happened with what they were expected to say happened. Mara built the office slowly. She selected people with reputations for being precise rather than popular. Analysts who asked annoying questions, officers who had stalled out not because they were incompetent, but because they wouldn't smooth corners. Her standing rule was simple. If you can't explain it cleanly, we don't sign it. At first, commands resisted. They always did. Then they adapted. Because the Integrity Review Office didn't punish, it documented. And documentation had weight. General Harlan never returned. His retirement ceremony was brief, quiet. He shook hands, smiled for photographs, said the right words about service and sacrifice. He never mentioned Mara Vance. She never mentioned him. Years later, she would learn he'd asked once, through an intermediary, whether she felt satisfied. She declined to respond. Satisfaction was never the point. One afternoon, a familiar figure appeared at the office doorway. The young ensign from Norfolk, older now, sharper, rank on his collar, earned the hard way. "Ma'am," he said, standing straighter than required. She gestured him in. "I just wanted you to know," he said, "we used your framework on our last report. It didn't change the outcome, but it changed the tone." She nodded. "That's usually how it works." He hesitated. "They didn't thank us." She allowed a small, tired smile. "They rarely do." He left standing taller than when he arrived. Mara never wrote a book, never gave keynote speeches. Her name didn't trend. But inside the system, things shifted. After-action reports grew longer, but clearer. Footnotes appeared where summaries once stood alone. Phrases like contextual adjustment quietly disappeared. Young officers learned that accuracy was not rebellion, it was professionalism. The Integrity Review Office became a pause point in the machinery, not a stop, but a check. a place where reality was allowed to arrive intact. Her hair showed threads of gray now. Her stride was slower, but still steady. The bass woke around her. Cadence calls, engines starting. Another day of preparation for things no one ever fully controlled. She stopped at the fence and rested her hands on the cold metal. She thought of the hallway. 14. She thought of the slap. She thought of the room that finally listened. She didn't feel bitterness. She felt completion. In the end, courage isn't about confrontation. It's about consistency. It's about telling the same truth, in every room, at every rank, no matter who is listening. Because power doesn't corrupt all at once. It erodes, slowly, quietly, through compromises no one challenges. And sometimes, the most powerful act a soldier can commit is not violence, not defiance, not even sacrifice, but accuracy. Because when the truth is finally written down and left standing, it outlives everyone in the room. And that is how honor survives.